So in your course materials for this course, you will find this AJAX folder. I'm gonna open this in Visual Studio Code, and then I'm gonna open this index.html, and I'm gonna open this with live server. So this is really simple. It only has this load AJAX button. You can see we have the button right here, and also we have this with the ID output. And you will find that we have this data.txt file. We're gonna see how you can load the contents from a text file into your website using AJAX. Then we're gonna open this app.js, and right here I'm gonna create an event listener for this button. You can see it has this ID, so we're gonna add document get element by ID. Then we're gonna pass this button, and we're going to attach an event listener. It's going to be click, and we're gonna call this function load data. Then we're going to write the function load data, and we're gonna open a function. I'm gonna show you how to create an AJAX code with this code when we click in this button. So always when you are working with AJAX, you have to perform 4 different steps. The first one is create the new XML HTTP request object, and it's going to be something like this. You can name this whatever you want. In this case, I'm gonna use a const, and normally you will find all the examples on the internet using this XHR. Then I'm gonna add equals to new XML HTTP request. So this is going to create the object for the XML HTTP request. So that will create the object. Then you open the connection, and you are gonna use this same variable, and then you are gonna use a function called open. From here you can specify the request. In this case we're gonna use get. Then is going to be the URL. In this case I want to open this file data.txt, and then if you want to make this call asynchronous, you pass the last parameter as true. Then it's going to be the execution of the AJAX call, and here we're going to use XHR again on load, and this is going to be a function. From here we're going to check if this status is equals to 200. That means that this call was successful. So you can add something like this. We're gonna select this output, and I'm going to add document that get element by ID. We're gonna add output, and we're gonna insert the text, the response that we're receiving from this AJAX call. Let me add the rest of the code. This response text, and we're gonna close the H1. So this response text is going to be the response that we get from the server when we execute the URL using the connection. Finally, you need to send a request. Send a request, and it's going to be XHR send. So save this and open your project, and we need to click here, and you can see we have some info from a txt file, and this is going to be the contents from this data.txt file. So if I open this again, you can see that we have this status equals 200. There are several status. For example, and right here, if I console log this status like this, and open the project again, and open inspect, open the console, click here, and you can see we have the status is 200. If we change this file name to something else, save this and click here, and you can see we have 404. Really similar as the code that you will receive. For example, if you open a website and try to navigate into a page that doesn't exist, it will return 404 error. This is something really similar. So for example, there are 3 different codes, and the more commons, 200 is correct, Also 403 is forbidden, and 404 is not found. So right here we are checking that we are in the code 200, which is correct. Then we're gonna return, or we're gonna print the values from the file that we have here. Now this is a method that you can use to make AJAX call. Maybe you found on the internet an example using this code, something similar to this. I'm gonna comment this code that we have here, like this. There is another way of doing AJAX call. Is using the same, but using XHR on ready state change. Maybe you find an example on the internet, but you are not really sure what this means. So this was the older way of doing AJAX calls. So normally you will add something like this: if that this status equals to 200 and this dot ready state equals to 4, then normally you will execute the code like this. So copy this and paste and save this. Click here on load AJAX call, and you can see that we have the same result as we did in the last example. In this case, this is using on ready state change. So for example, if I add something like console.log ready state, and we add a comma, then we add XHR ready state like this, save this, open the project, click here. You can see we have different ready states, 2, 3, and 4. Let me cut this, and maybe we can add the ready state from here. Well, I think it's going to be like this. But for example, you can see we have 2, 3, and 4. There are also meanings for this code. Ready states, I'm going to add the code right here. 0 is going to be equals to onsent, and 1 is going to be opened. And these are the codes that are running. 2 is going to be receive. 3 is going to be equals to loading, and 4 is going to be equals to done. So you can see that we are checking the status 200, and you can see 200 is correct. And also we're checking the ready state, which is going to be 4, and 4 is when this call is done. So in the next video, and then in the next videos, we're gonna continue learning about AJAX. In the newest versions of JavaScript, we have something called the fetch API, but I think it's important as a JavaScript developer that you know at least the basics of AJAX. So let's continue working in the next video. In the last video, I showed you how to load data using AJAX from a TXT file. In the course materials for this video, you will find this AJAX JSON. So let's open this into the editor. And JSON is going to be really important since almost all the REST APIs are going to be using JSON. So we're gonna see how you can read the values and print the results from a JSON in JavaScript. Something really simple. Here we have a button for the employee, button 2 for employees, and then we have an ID for employee and another div with the ID employees in plural. If you open this employee.json, this file is empty. Here we are going to create the JSON. So if you have no experience working with JSON, you will learn how to create a JSON file. We also have employees.json. This one is also empty. I'm gonna show you how to work with JSON with multiple objects in the next video. First, we're gonna work with this employee. I'm gonna open the app.js, and if you take a look here in the HTML, we're gonna execute employee when the button 1 is submitted or clicked. So we're gonna add the following code: document.getElementById. We're gonna pass button 1. And we're going to add an event listener click. We're gonna call this function load employee like this. So we're gonna create this function load employee. So this is going to be really similar to the last example, but we're gonna open this employee.json. If you haven't used JSON before, .json is going to be the extension when you create a JSON file. But normally JSON is going to be used more in a REST API. In this chapter, we're going to see how you can read the values from a JSON REST API. But first, we're going to start simple. We're going to start working with this employee.json. So this JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And it's going to be really similar to a JavaScript object. Normally, a JSON will be created using the curly braces. Then you're going to use a key and a value. So for example, let's say that we are working in an employee. We're going to add something like an ID. And you can see that this ID is grabbed inside double quotes. It has to be inside double quotes. If you use single quotes or the backtick, it's going to cause you an error. Then you're going to pass the value. So we're going to add one right here. Normally, you can add strings or numbers into your JSON. Then we're going to create another one. We're going to call this name. I'm going to add my name. Then we're going to add company. So we're going to add, it's going to be double quotes, my company. And you can see that between each one of these, we have a comma here, comma here. And the only that doesn't need a comma is going to be the last one. In this case, I'm going to add another one. So we're going to add another comma. And we're going to call this job. And we're going to call web developer. Like this. So this is going to be our first JSON. You can see this last one doesn't have this comma. Also, you can see that we're using double quotes in all of these keys, but this one, which is a number. So this is going to be a really basic JSON. We're going to close this. And from here, we're going to write this function. Remember, we need to perform 4 different steps. So first we create the object. It's going to be const xhr equals to new XML HTTP request. Then you open the connection. So it's going to be xhr connection dot open. In this case is going to be also get. We're gonna open the employee.json file, and this is going to be asynchronous. Then you execute the function. So we're gonna use xhr onload equals to a function, and we're going to add if this dot status equals 200. We're going to execute the code. If you remember, this is going to return a response text, so we can add something like a document and a dot get element by ID, and we need to open this employee ID. So we're gonna select this and pass this employee. We're gonna add inner HTML. Is going to be equals to this that response text. This is going to be the response that we're getting when you are trying to open this employee.json. Finally, the last step is going to be send a request. And it's going to be xhr send, like this. So this is going to work. Let's open the project. You can see we have employee. Click here. And you can see that we have something like this. It's printing the JSON, but it's printing this as a normal string. If you open the console here, try to open the console, click here on console, and try to send this response text into the console. Console.log, that response text. So save this and open again the project. Click here, and you can see that this is printing a string. So we can use the function that we saw earlier, json.parse. json.parse is going to convert this string into a JSON, and it's going to print also actually it's going to print this as an object. So click here, and you can see we have an object. This json.parse function is going to check for this syntax, and then it will find that once converted is going to be an object. So we can do something like that here. I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to use json.parse. Like this. Save this, and click here on employee. You can see we have object, and this is because now this is an object and we need to access each of the properties using a dot. So we're gonna cut this and we're gonna create a variable called employee, and then we're gonna create another one. Here we're going to add build the template, and this one right here get the response as an object. That's why we're using JSON.parse. So we're going to have const output is going to be equals to the backtip template literals, and we're gonna use UL, close the UL, the unordered list. Then we're gonna create an li, close the li, and we're going to add ID right here. Then we open the $, curly braces, and the name of the object is employee. And if you open this employee, you can see that the key is called index ID. So we're gonna add employee.id so we can access that property. We need to access the rest of the properties. So the next one is going to be the name of the employee, name, employee, that name, and close the li. The other one, or the third one, is going to be company. So we're going to add company, employee, that company, close the li. Finally, it's going to be the job that this person is doing in this company. So it's going to be employee, that job, close the li. So this is going to build the template. So right here, I'm going to add print the HTML, and it's going to be equals to this output variable. So something like this is going to print a formatted data right here into this page. So let's click on employee, and now you can see we have ID, the number 1, we have name, we have the company, and we have a job. So now you can see that this looks more formatted, and this is how you read JSON data with JavaScript. You have to access each of the properties, or at least the properties that you want to print. So in the next video, we're gonna see how you can print multiple records, multiple objects in a JSON file. In this video, I'm gonna show you how to read a JSON with multiple records. So basically, it's going to be an array. So we're gonna copy this and we're gonna use this as the base. So when you have a JSON and you have multiple records, you're gonna use the square brackets. That means this is going to be an array of JSON objects. Then we're gonna paste the data. You can see we have one and we have the information. Right here I'm gonna add a comma. So we're gonna create another one. So let's add this an ID, it's going to be 2. I'm gonna change the name. Right here I'm gonna use Mary, and it's going to be the same company. And the job is going to be designer, something like this. Then we're gonna add another one, comma right here, paste, and this ID is going to be number 3. The name is going to be Alexa, and finally the job is going to be app developer. So notice that we have these commas in each property. Only the last one doesn't have a comma. This is really similar when you have an array of JSON objects. You have a comma here, but this one, the last one, doesn't require the comma. And actually, if you add a comma right here, this is going to print an error. You can see that we have this error right here, trailing comma. So we can save this, close this, and now you can see in the index.html, we have this button to fire the employees. And then we have this ID called employees. So we're gonna open this file, copy this and paste. In this case, we're gonna change this to button 2. And we're gonna call this function load employees in plural. So this is going to be really similar. So we're gonna copy this function. And right here, I'm going to add displays single employee. And this one is going to display all the employees. So paste this, and we're gonna change the name of the function, copy this name, and change right here. So here on the top we have a function that is going to print a single employee. This one is going to print multiple employees. The steps are going to be the same. We need to create the object, we need to open the connection, we need to execute the function, and we need to send the request. Basically, this is the same. Here we're gonna change the name of the file. It's going to be employees in plural. Then I'm gonna cut this template and remove everything from here. You can see that we have this employee, so we're gonna change this to employees, and I'm gonna console.log this result, console log employees in plural. So save this and click on the second button. You can see that this is returning an array with 3 different objects. So if you wanna print this similar to this, we need to write a for each statement. So we're gonna remove this. And this is what we are going to do. We're gonna add a new variable called output. And this is going to be a single string. Then we're gonna add employees that for each like this. And then we're gonna execute a function. In this case, employees is plural. Here we're gonna pass this as singular. Like this. Then we're gonna grab this output, and we're gonna add output, and we're gonna concatenate. So it's going to be output plus equals and template or string literals, and we're gonna paste this code from the previous example. Semicolon right here, and this is going to create 3 different unordered lists with the information for each employee. And finally, if you open the project, we have this div with the ID employees. So right here, after everything is done, we're gonna add document dot get element by ID. We're gonna pass employees inner HTML, and it's going to be equals to the output. So save this, click on the second button, and now you can see we had 3 different records. If you click on employee, now you can see we have 1 record. So the most important thing here is to remember how you can create a JSON. You have to use the curly braces and a key and a value grab with double quotes. This is going to be important. If you have multiple records, you have to add the square bracket. So this is going to be an array. And if you try to iterate between a single object, it's going to be like this. If you try to iterate in an array of JSON objects, you have to use while, do while, for each, or any of these functions, and you have to access each of the properties that you want to print individually, and you are going to be fine. So in the next video, we're gonna see how you can use AJAX and display and REST API. So before we start working with the next projects, we're gonna see what is an API, a REST API, and what is a request. So let's start learning about APIs first. API stands for Application Programming Interface. It's a set of functions, methods, and tools available in a library. An API must be used by other software as an abstraction layer, and in order to access and use the service, you have to send a structure request, which is defined by the API. A nice example of an API is Google Maps API. When you add Google Maps into a website, you are using this API in another piece of software. This is an abstraction layer because you are not programming directly into the Google Maps API, but you send a structure request, for example, to tell the Google Maps API the zoom level, the latitude and longitude, where the pin is going to be displayed, the type of map that you want to display. Everything is going to be part of an structure request. You have to use the functions that the Google Maps API has defined. So then, in the other hand, we have REST APIs. So REST is representational state transfer. A REST API can be developed in any language. Even JavaScript, you can develop a REST API. It will describe how the resources are going to be available and how you are going to access them. A REST API must respond to the following requests: get, post, put, patch, and delete. Each API have its own set of rules, method, and structure. We're gonna work with some different REST APIs, and you are going to see that in order to use this, we are going to use different techniques to access the data. So let's review some examples of this request and something called the endpoints. REST API endpoints and request. A REST API must use endpoints, which at the end are URLs, to perform CRUD operations. So for example, if you want to retrieve all the clients in REST, you have to use a GET request, and normally it's going to be /clients, the endpoint. If you want to get a specific client, again, the request is going to be GET, and normally the URL is going to be /clients /the ID. In this case, for example, we are returning the ID 10. If you want to add a new client, it's going to be post. Post is going to add a new client, and the URL is going to be the /clients. If you want to update the client info, the request is going to be put. Then you're going to use the endpoint /clients and the ID, which in this case, for example, is going to be 3. Of course, this ID is going to be different based on the client that you want to update. Finally, if you want to remove a client, you are going to send a delete request to the URL /clients and then the ID of this client. So basically, this is REST APIs and endpoints with requests. We're going to start working with this in the next chapters. We're going to develop some examples using REST APIs, and you're going to see how easy it is to consume REST APIs in JavaScript. In this video, we're going to see how you can consume a REST API with AJAX and JavaScript. If you scroll to the bottom in this page, JSON placeholder, you will find that this is a free service to test and learn about REST APIs. So if you scroll a little, you can see that we have these resources at the bottom. So for example, you can open these albums, and it's going to print some albums right here. And some photos. It's going to be a response. It's going to be a JSON response. But you can access the values, title, URL, and the thumbnail URL, something like that. And we're going to close this. And this is going to return 5,000 items. So it's going to be really big response. We have also some to-dos. You can see that we have something different. And by the way, this is looking like this. Maybe you have a different view, because here I added this extension called JSON View. I really recommend that you install this. It's going to format the JSON responses a lot better instead of the basic view that you will find in any browser. So we're going to close this, and finally you have also users. So this is going to print some users. So let's create an example using this. I'm going to open this JSON API. So we're going to open this into the editor. You will find this folder in your course materials. It's called JSON API. And it's going to be the project that we're going to use. It's going to be something really, really simple. Again, it's going to be using a framework called Skeleton. And you can see that here only have this button that says load post. And this is an href. It contains this ID called load. And we also have this div with ID result. If you open the app.js, this is going to be empty. Here is where we are going to work in this video. And finally, one thing to notice here is, for example, if you open this post, this is going to be a JSON response. Doing this kind of stuff, consuming REST APIs is going to be really common when developing with JavaScript. So this is something that any JavaScript developer should know. That's why we have this into this course. And by the way, also the projects from the rest of the course are going to be using REST APIs. So we're going to write a selector. We have document dot query selector, and we're gonna select the button with ID load. Then we're gonna attach an event listener. It's going to be click, and we're gonna call this function load post. Then we're going to add this function load post, and this is going to be using AJAX, and we need to perform the 4 different steps. So first we're gonna create the object, and it's going to be a variable const xhr equals to new XML HTTP request. Then we're gonna open the connection. Open the connection is going to use this variable and the method called open. First parameter is going to be get. It's going to be a get request. Second parameter is going to be the URL that we have here. So you can, for example, once we finish this example, you can test the other resources that you will find in JSON placeholder. We're gonna use post for this example, and we're gonna make this asynchronous. And then we're gonna execute the function, and we're gonna use xhr load is going to be equals to a function. Then we're gonna check for the status. If this status is equals to 200, we're going to execute the code. You can see that this is an JSON response. So this is going to come as a string, and we need to convert this into a JavaScript object. So we're gonna create a variable response, and it's going to be equals to json.parse, and we're gonna pass this dot, and the response is going to come as response text. Then we can console log the response just to test that everything is working. And finally, you need to send the request, and add xhr, send, and save this. Open the project and open also the console, and we're gonna open console, click here, and you can see we have an array with 100 objects. You can see we have at the bottom length 100. You can see here in the response JSON placeholder, it says it will return 100 items. So we have something like this. So in order to work with this, we're gonna, for example, I'm gonna expand this. I want to print the body and also the title. So you can see this is an array, so we're gonna use for each. So we're gonna remove this, print the contents, and it's going to be let output equals to nothing. And then we're gonna start looping through this array. Response dot for each. This is going to execute a function, and it's going to be a post. So from here we're gonna concatenate this. So we're gonna concatenate this output plus equals template or string literals, and we're gonna add an h3, close the h3, and right here I'm going to create a $, curly braces, post, and we want to print the title and the body. So it's going to be dot title, and let's add a paragraph. Second one is going to be post that body. Finally, we need to insert this into the HTML, so we're gonna use document dot query selector, and we're gonna use result inner HTML equals to the output. So this is going to print all the posts. 100 posts is going to print the body and the content. So click here, and now you can see we have 100 posts from this REST API. So consuming REST APIs is going to be really common when you are a JavaScript developer. And this is a really simple REST APIs. There are some others that are more advanced where you can send some arguments into the URL. We're gonna see an example of one of these REST APIs in the next video, where we are going to develop a complete project using a REST API. So let's review the project scope for the name generator from a REST API. This is going to be one of my favorite projects for this course. So let's review the scope. It's going to be called name generator, and it's going to consume the data from a REST API. And I'm going to show you what is a REST API in case that this term is something new for you. So we're going to send parameters to the REST API based on the information provided by the user in the HTML form. So next, we're going to print the results from the REST API using Fetch API, AJAX, and Async Await. Then we're going to use some intermediate techniques, such as Async JavaScript, arrow functions, and JSON. So let's review the project. So this is going to be the project, generate names. You can see we can filter by country. So for example, if you click here, you can select from a list of countries. So let's say that someone is having a baby and they want a name from a specific country. They can filter this using this form. So for this example, I'm going to select France. And you can see we can select between male or female. So maybe they are having a baby boy or a baby girl. They can filter by this. So we're going to select female. And then they can generate the number of names. So let's select, let's change this to 10. We're going to click here on generate. And you can see this is going to return the results. So let's say that they didn't like any of these names. They can change, for example, let's say Colombia. We're going to keep a female and 10. We're going to generate. And this is going to generate 10 different names. So let's say that they changed to male. And this time they want only 5 different names. So we're going to click on generate. And this is going to generate 5 different names. So we're going to consume a REST API. And we're going to send the parameters based on the information that the user provides in this form. This project is going to be developed using REST APIs. It's going to be developed using AJAX, Async Await, Fetch API, and a lot of different techniques. So let's start working with this project in the next video. So we're going to create a new project. In your course materials, you will find this generator AJAX. So open this into Visual Studio Code, open the index, and I'm going to right click and open this with Live Server. So this is going to be the project name generator. From here you can select, for example, a country, and you can select, for example, France. You can select between male and female, for example, female, and you can select how many names you want to generate. Then we're going to click on generate, and it's going to display the list of names here on the right. So this is going to be a really helpful project, especially for people that is looking, for example, for a name for his baby or something like that. And we're going to use this REST API called uinames.com is the website, but you can use the REST API also. It's going to use JSON. It's going to give the response as a JSON. And the main difference between this and the previous project is that you can pass optional parameters. So we're going to see how we can send these parameters using this form. We're going to read these values and we're going to send the parameters into the REST API. So it's going to filter the results and it's going to display the results here on the right. So first we're going to open the project and we're going to see this really quick. You can see that we have a form. It has this ID. So we're going to select this ID. Then we have these options. So we're going to filter by country. You can see we have filter by country. If you take a look here on the optional parameters, you can see that we can pass region specific results. So it's going to be a URL like this. It's going to return only names that are specific to this region. And we have these names. Of course, you can add more countries into this list once we finish this project. So the basic idea for this project is, for example, if you're having a baby or something, or anyone is having a baby, maybe they want to see names from Brazil. Brazil should be with C. Or maybe they want names from Italy or something like that. We're going to allow the user to filter by country. Also, if they know that they will have a baby girl or baby boy, we can filter by male or female. So we're going to add this. It's going to be the gender. And finally, we have number of names to generate. You can see I added this as a quantity. So this quantity and this genre are something that you can pass into the REST APIs. You can see that we have the limit results to the male or female. So we can pass something like this. And also right here is the amount of names. You can see that you can pass from 1 to 500. In this case, I added a minimum of 5 and a maximum of 15, but you can change these values in the HTML. Finally, we have an IDE with the result, so we're gonna inject the code right here. So we're gonna start working with this. We have this app.js, and we're gonna check for the submission of this form. So we're going to add document, and we're gonna add query selector. In this case, we're gonna see the name of the form. You can see we have these generate names. So as query selector, we're gonna use the pound sign. Then we're gonna add an event listener. This one is going to check for the submit, and we're gonna call this one load names. So then we're gonna execute the function to query the API, and it's going to call this function is going to be called load names. We're gonna pass the event because we're going to prevent the default, prevent default like this. So then we're gonna read the values from the form and create the variables. So we're gonna create a const, and we're gonna call this one origin. It's going to be a document get element by ID, and we're gonna select, and I think this is called country. You can see we have the ID right here, country. So we're gonna pass that country, and we're gonna access the value by adding dot value. Then const the genre for this. We're gonna add document get element by ID also, and we're gonna check the ID. You can see it's this genre. Then we're gonna add the value dot value again. So finally we're gonna add the quantity. We're gonna change this to amount, how many names we want to get from the REST API. So we're going to select this is quantity, the ID. So the document get element by ID. It's going to be the quantity and a value. So then we're gonna we're gonna build the URL. The URL, because we're going to pass this into the URL for the REST API, is going to be this one. We only need this part right here. So this is going to be the main URL. We're gonna add this as let, and we're gonna add the URL. So we're gonna read these values, and we're going to add more parameters into the URL. So let's start working with name, with origin. Read the origin and append to the URL. In case that this is this value is there, so we're gonna add if origin is not equals to something or an empty string. That means that the user has select something. So in this case, we're gonna select the URL, and we're gonna add a plus sign equals, and we're gonna add the template or string literals. So you can see we're reading the country, the origin, and right here we have this region. So this is going to be the name. So we're gonna copy this, and we're gonna concatenate this to the URL. So we're gonna paste right here. Instead of having Germany, I'm going to add $sign in curly braces, and we're gonna copy the origin right here. So whatever the user has select from the form is going to be added right here. So we're gonna need to remove this right here, and we're gonna append ampersand at the end. So we're gonna add console.log, and we're gonna pass the URL. So save this and open the project. I'm gonna inspect this and open the console. And right here, for example, if I add something like Colombia and try to generate, this is going to add Colombia into the URL. So you can open this, for example, open this. And now you can see we have a name from Colombia. It's printing the name Jenny, and you can see the gender is female, but is filtering by the region. Andrea, Alejandro, we're getting names from Colombia. In the case that the person doesn't add any country, we can generate this, and it's going to print this without the region. So that's why we're using this builder in the URL. So in the next video, we're gonna continue building this URL. So let's continue in the next video. So let's continue building this URL. And in this case, we're gonna copy this and paste. And we're gonna read now the genre, and append to the URL. And we're gonna add this genre. And if you open the option parameters, you can see that we need to pass this as a gender. So we're gonna save this and open the project again. We're gonna select, for example, Mexico, and we're gonna select male. Click here on generate. And now you can see we have region Mexico and gender male. So again, we can copy this URL, paste right here. And now you can see we have names, Gustavo, and it says male. Yeah, it should be like this. And you can see we have the name, it says Juan Antonio Lozano. Then we have a mail, so send another request. Now you can see we have another name in Mexico. And these are names in Mexico, but also is filtering by the gender. So you can see we have something like this. If you try to remove this and try to generate, this is going to generate names only by male or by female. Or if you decide to remove this and add the country, now it's going to filter by the region. So that's why we're using this builder like this. Finally, we're gonna read the amount. So we're gonna copy this and paste, read the amount, and append to the URL. So we're gonna copy this variable, copy and paste right here, amount and amount. So if you open again the docs, you can see it should be passed as an amount. So we're gonna open amount, save this, and let's make a test. So we're gonna select Portugal. You can see we have a male or female, and we're gonna generate 10 different names. We're gonna click here on generate, and this is going to be the URL. So we can copy this, paste this right here, enter, and now you can see we have 10 different names. So now this is working fine because we can change the country, we can change the gender, or we can change also the number of names to generate. And we will have something like this. So now we're going to get these responses. In the next video, we're gonna make the AJAX call right here. So let's start working in the next video. So we're gonna execute or create the AJAX call. AJAX call. So we're gonna perform the 4 steps. First, we're gonna create the object. XHR is going to be equals to new XML HTTP request like this. Then we're gonna open the connection. I'm gonna scroll so you can see this in the center. Then we're gonna use XHR open. It's going to be get, also get request. And we're gonna pass the URL that we're building. So it's going to be passed right here. So it doesn't matter what the user has select from this form, it's going to send this URL dynamically in this URL variable. Then we're gonna add a sync. This is going to be a synchronous code, and we're gonna execute the function. And we're gonna add XHR on load is going to be equals to a function, and we're gonna check the status. If the status is equals to 200, we're going to execute the code. And again, this is going to return a JSON. You can see it's going to be a JSON object, but it's going to be an array. So we need to use JSON.parse. So we're gonna create a variable called names equals to JSON.parse, and we're gonna pass this dot response text like this, console.log the names, so we can check that this is working. And the last step is going to be send the request. So we're gonna add the variable XHR send, save this, and now let's select, for example, France, female, and we're gonna select 10 names to generate. Click here on generate, and now you can see we have a result of 10 different names. You can see here on the gender we have female in all of them. You can see this is working. And also the region is France. and it's returning 10 different names. So in the next video, we're gonna see how we can insert this response into the HTML. So let's continue working in the next video. So now we have the response and the request is being made and is filtering the results correctly. Then we're gonna insert into the HTML. So first we're gonna see here on the index that we have this ID called result. We're gonna create something like this. We're gonna create let HTML is going to be equals to an h2 and it's going to print generated names. We can also something like result, but I'm gonna add this like this. So then we're gonna loop. I'm gonna remove this. We're gonna loop into all the different names. First I'm gonna add HTML. We're gonna concatenate. We're gonna concatenate a list class right here. And right here on the bottom, I'm going to concatenate the closing UL tag because each of the name is going to be inside an li. So then you can see the response is on these names. This is going to come as an array. So we're gonna add names and a dot for each function, and we're gonna pass a name right here. So this is going to print. We're gonna concatenate into the HTML, open the template or string literals, and inside is going to add li and close the li. And you can see if you take a look here on the response, we have the name. In order to access this name, you need to add name, the name key. So we're going to add $, and we're gonna add name that name like this. So finally, we're gonna insert this into the HTML. It's going to be a document dot query selector, and we're gonna select result inner HTML. So this is going to be inserted, and we're gonna pass the HTML variable. So you can see here I have an unexpected token, line 45. Yeah, right here, this one should be right here on the bottom. So let's open this again. We're gonna open, for example, names from Italy, female, and we're gonna generate 10 different names. So generate this, and now you can see we have generated names. We have Sarah, Monica, Paola, and a bunch of different names. Right here we're missing some styling, and yeah, it's because this should be class list. So now we're gonna select, for example, United States. Let's say that we're looking for names for a baby boy, and we're gonna generate 50 names. Generate, and now you can see we have this result. So another in Japan, maybe a female. Let's add 10 names right here and generate this. It's going to print something like this. And Mexico, a female, also 10 names. And you can see this is going to be the result. If the person wants to skip the country but wants to generate names for female, this is going to work, but this is going to return names from all over the world. You can see that it's printing names from all the countries, but you can add also another countries if you want in this code. If the country that you are trying to generate is not here, you can add the name right here in the options. So this was an example using REST APIs and AJAX. You can see that I added here on the code some asynchronous calls. You can see we have this. It's going to be asynchronous. In the next chapter, we're gonna see what is asynchronous programming, and you're going to learn about callbacks, about promises, and other functions that will make your code asynchronous in JavaScript. So let's see what is asynchronous JavaScript. So first we're gonna see what is synchronous code. In a synchronous code, for example, in a 2-line synchronous program, line 2 cannot start before line 1 is executed and has finished. An example of the real life of this is going to be the supermarket line. The supermarket line is going to be one person at the time, and the person that is on the back is going to wait until the rest of the persons are dispatched So now let's see what is asynchronous code. In asynchronous programming, line 2 can be executed at the same time than line 1 and also can finish first. The time execution will depend on how complex is the task. In a real-world example is a restaurant. In a restaurant, there are 30, 40, 100 persons eating at the same time. If 2 persons order something from the menu at the same time, and for example, one just orders 1 glass of water, while the other orders the most complex thing on the menu, the person who asks for the glass of water is going to be attended first than the person who asks for the most complex thing on the menu. Similar is asynchronous programming. In JavaScript, you can use async to create asynchronous functions. For example, you can get the sales from a REST API, and you can also get the clients. If you have 1 million sales and you have only 10 clients, get clients is going to execute and finish first than the get sales function. In JavaScript, most of the time, when you create asynchronous code, it's going to be when you are consuming APIs or REST APIs. You can create asynchronous code with JavaScript using XML HTTP request and the Fetch API. jQuery is another example of a library with this functionality, especially when you are using AJAX. And in JavaScript, you can also create asynchronous code with the following functions: callbacks, promises, and async await. So from here, we're going to start working with asynchronous JavaScript. In the next video, we're going to see what are callbacks. Then we're going to start working with promises. So we're going to see what are the callbacks. And we're going to open again the learning.js file. In this case, I'm going to open this index. And in the last project, we changed this to app ES6. We're going to return this as app.js. And I'm gonna remove the contents. Of course, as I said earlier, I recommend that you save all the codes for the future, for future reference. So I'm gonna resize this window, and so this one, and I'm gonna close this. I'm gonna close this. We're gonna add something like this. Open the console, and I'm gonna add this in the bottom. So here we're gonna start working with callbacks. Callbacks are known as the cornerstone of asynchronous programming in JavaScript. And actually we already have written a lot of callbacks in this course. A callback is as simple as a function inside another function. So let's see what are callbacks. So we're gonna create an array. We're gonna call this one cities, and we're gonna pass, for example, London, New York, Madrid, and we're gonna add Paris, and we're gonna add Berlin. So we have a list of cities right here, and we're gonna use a for each statement to access the individual values. So this is we're gonna add cities for each. And for each is a function, and you can see normally we pass this function again. So this is going to be the callback because this is a function inside this other function. So basically that's a callback. So you can see that this function doesn't have a name, so these are known as inline callbacks. So this is going to be a callback that the function that is inside doesn't have a name. So we're gonna finish this. We're gonna add city right here, and we're gonna console log city. So this is going to print the individual values for this array. So basically this is a callback. This function inside these other functions. And when the function doesn't have a name, is inline callbacks. You can also write the callbacks using a function declaration. Callback with function declaration, and it could be like this: function callback, and then you pass the city, and console log this city, and it's going to be the for each like this, cities that for each, and then you pass the name of the function. So I'm gonna comment this, save this, and you can see it's going to be the same result because we have for each, which is a function, and then we have another function. So basically it's a function inside another function. That's going to be a callback. And you can see that this function is, or this code is calling this function, but this doesn't require the parentheses. That's going to be really important. So we're gonna create another example with callbacks. We're gonna create another more advanced example. Let's say that we have some countries. So we have a country list, we have something like France, we have something like Spain, we have Portugal, then we have Australia, England, and Ireland. So let's say that we have this list of countries. Then we're gonna write a function that is going to simulate that we are downloading this list from a server. So we're gonna display the countries after 1 second. So we're gonna call this function display countries. It's going to be like this. Then we're gonna create a set timeout. Set timeout. This is going to be a function. Also the set timeout, you can see the function is set timeout, and we have this function. So this is also a callback. So after 1 second, we're gonna execute this function, the body of this function. We're gonna create something like let HTML is going to be empty. Then we're going to add the countries that for each. Here we're going to have another callback, and we're gonna pass country right here. So this is going to print HTML is going to be plus equal, so we can concatenate from the previous iteration. And right here I'm going to print the country like this. So finally we're gonna print this into the HTML. We're gonna add something like document.body inner HTML equals to the HTML. So we need to execute this function. So we're gonna print the countries. So we're gonna call the function display countries, save this, and you can see this is going to delay this function 1 second, and then it's going to print the results. So let's say that this is a list of clients. So you start working, then you download the list of the latest client, and you can see when I reload, let's say that this delay is the time that takes to download the client list. But let's say that we have finished downloading this and a new client is added. So at that moment, that client won't be in the list because the list has already downloaded. So we're gonna create a function that is going to be executed after this function. So we're gonna call this function new country. Maybe if you are working with clients, this could be also new client. So this one is going to take 2 parameters. It's going to be the name of the country, and it's going to be the callback function. So I'm gonna call this as the callback. So this is going to be the callback function that is going to run. And we're gonna set timeout again, function. Now this is going to delay 2 seconds. So this function is going to run after 1 second. It's going to download this list of countries. Then after 2 seconds, we're gonna insert a new country. At that time, this list is going to be already here. So we're gonna add the new country. Add the new country, and we have the array countries, and we're gonna push to add that country into the array of countries. Then we're gonna execute the callback. And the callback basically is going to be this function. So we're gonna pass this callback right here. We need to open the parentheses. So this function is going to insert a new country into the array of countries, and then it's going to call this function again, and it's going to refresh the output. So we need to add this country. add a new country. And let's say that we add a new country. The function is called a new country. You can see it takes two parameters, so we're going to add new country. It takes two parameters, so we're going to add the country, Germany, and then the callback function. The callback function is going to be this display countries. So it's going to be like this. Now we can save this, and we're going to save this, and this list is going to print after 1 second. Then after 2 seconds, the new country is going to be added. It's going to insert Germany into the array, but then it's going to execute this function again, and it's going to refresh this list of countries. So save this. You can see after 1 second, the list is there. After 2 seconds, Germany is added into the array, and the callback is called. The callback function is display countries, so basically this is going to execute this code again, but at this time it's going to add Germany into the array. That's why we have Germany. So basically this is going to refresh the output in the HTML when the new country is added. And that's where callback functions are really helpful. So in the next video, we're going to see what are promises. Again, this is going to be one of the nice and newest features in modern JavaScript. So let's continue working and learning more about asynchronous JavaScript in the next video. So let's see what are promises in JavaScript. The promise object represents when a function or a task is completed or also has failed of an asynchronous operation and its resulting value. So we're going to create an example using promises. Promises are going to be really important because in the next chapter we're going to introduce, in the next video we're going to introduce a fetch API which will require that we understand promises. So let's create this example. We're going to create a new promise object. I'm going to create a const variable. We're going to call this one apply discount, and it's going to be equals to a new promise. So this is going to create the promise object. So this is going to have a function. If you remember, this is going to be a callback. So basically this function is going to require a resolve and a reject parameters. If you remember, I said that promises represent when a function is completed or has failed. So normally the resolve, we're going to add the comment right here. Resolve is going to execute when the function is successful, and reject when the function or the task has failed. By the way, this parenthesis, I'm going to cut this, should be right here on the end. So this is going to be a new promise. If you console log this apply discount like this, you can see that we have this promise. It says pending because we haven't done anything with this promise. But you can see this is a promise. So we're going to create a new variable right here. We're going to call this one const discount, and we're going to set this value to true. Right here I'm going to add if discount, so we're going to check the value of this. This is going to be true. In this case I'm going to add resolve, because resolve is going to be when the function is successful. So we're going to add resolve, and we're going to add discount, apply it, something like this, something really simple. In the else statement, that means that this discount is false, so it's going to be reject. So we're going to add reject right here, and we're going to add discount failed, something like that. Now we have this resolve and we have this reject. If you save this, you can see that it says promise and it says resolve and it says discount apply it. So normally when you see something like this, it's because you are missing something. We have the value right here, but we need to access this value. You can see it says promise value. In order to access this, I'm going to add this apply discount. And you need to add the following code. You need to add dot then, and then this is going to be a function, and it's going to have a result. So from here you can console log this result. And this result is going to be basically this value. But you need to access this using dot then. So remember, if you have a code like this that says promise resolve Maybe it can say also pending or some other, but it says promise. You need to add .then. That's going to be really important. So we're gonna save this, and you can see that we have discount applied. So we access this. I'm gonna remove this. So you can see we have discount applied. So this is the result that we have here. If you set this to false, we need to execute the reject. This is going to be executed when we resolve the promise. If we save this, you can see that we don't have anything. So right here I'm going to add, in order to access the reject value, this discount fail, we need to use a keyword called catch. And catch is going to get the error. Always is going to get the error from a promise. So we're gonna add console.log, and we're gonna pass the result. The result is going to be this text that we have here. So save this, and now you can see we have discount failed. So normally the result is going to be attached to this .then to access the value. When you have reject, it's going to be an error. You have to use catch to grab that error. So that's going to be really, really important. Resolve is going to be, the value is going to be accessed using .then, and reject, the value is going to be accessed using .catch. So this is a basic example of using promises, but they are going to be really helpful because in the next video we're gonna see how to work with the fetch API. In the course materials for this course, you will find this fetch API folder. Let's open this into the text editor. And we're gonna open the index.html. We're gonna open this with live server. I'm gonna make this smaller. So go live. And this is going to be a similar example as we did have earlier. And right here it should be JSON and JSON API. So basically we have this data. We're gonna see how you can use the fetch API to access this file, txt file. Then we have JSON. We're gonna access this employees JSON. And finally we have JSON API. I'm gonna show you how to access a REST API using fetch API. So this is going to be a really similar example as we have when we were working with AJAX. So then we're gonna open the JS, and we're gonna open the app.js. First, we're gonna see the example using the load data. We're gonna open the button one. So this is going to load this data.txt. So basically the fetch API is going to replace AJAX, but for me it was important that you learn also AJAX. So we're gonna create a document, get element by ID. We're gonna add button, and we're gonna attach an event listener. This is going to be a click, and we're gonna load a text function. So we're gonna add load text. We're gonna call this function like this, load text. And we're gonna see the difference between AJAX and the fetch API. So right here in the body of the function, we need to add fetch. Fetch is going to be the function where you need to pass the URL. So in this case, it's going to be data.txt. Then right after this, we need to use a promise. So we're gonna use .then in order to access to the data into this file. So we're gonna add .then. This is going to execute a function, and this is going to contain a response. So we can basically we can console log this response and see what we have so far. So inspect this and open the console. And something really quick, let me add JS right here because I added this into a folder. So again, open the app.js. Now click here on load data, and you can see that we basically get a response. It says response, and you can see it says basic. We have some other information. You can see here we have the status, we have basic. So this is going to be basically the response. Something really important when you are working with the fetch API is how you are going to return the response. So open this proto, and here you can see we have a lot of different methods. So for example, you can return this response as JSON in case that you have JSON. But here on the bottom, you can see we have text, and this is a function. So we can console.log this and add dot text and save this and click here on load data. And now you can see we have a promise pending. So always when you see something like this, promise pending, promise successful, and others, that means that you need to add another dot then. So first we're gonna return this because we need to access this into the next line. So we're gonna return response dot text, and right here I'm going to add another then like this function, and this is going to contain some data or the response. So we're gonna console.log the data. So click here again, and now you can see we have data from a txt file. So when you are working with the fetch API, first you have to give a return value. Normally it's going to be text or JSON, but you can see we have something like this. Then we have a second dot then, and basically this is going to be the data. Now that we have specified how we want to return this data. So we can add something here. We can add, for example, document get element by ID to print this into HTML. We're gonna add result because this ID is this div is using the ID result. So we're gonna add this right here, and we're gonna add inner HTML is going to be equals to data. So save this, click here on load data, and now you can see we have data from a txt file. So let's say that we misspell the URL and we add load data. You can see that we have this error, but you can also use .catch. And this is going to give you a more detailed error. So it's going to be a function, it's going to take an error, and we can console log this error. So save this, click here on load data, and you can see that we have cannot get and the name of the file. So catch is going to be running every time that a promise has failed. But the most important thing here is that when you are using the fetch API, you should always specify the return value. It's going to be text or JSON almost all the time. And then you have to give a second dot then to access the actual values. So you can see that when you are working with the fetch API, the code looks more organized. So we're going to use the fetch API for the rest of the course because this is going to be the new standard and is going to replace AJAX. So in the next video, we're going to see how we can read this JSON. It's going to be this second button that says JSON. So let's continue working in the next video. In this video, we're going to continue learning about the fetch API. We're going to run this JSON button. So right here, I'm going to create a second event listener. This is going to be button 2. It's going to have an event listener. Also, it's going to be click. In this case, it's going to be load JSON. So we're going to load this employees.json. So close this, copy this. And here on the bottom, I'm going to add load and print JSON. So we're going to call this function load JSON. And first, if you remember, we need to add fetch. In this case, I'm going to make all the steps again because this is a new topic introduced into the course. So we're going to add fetch, and you have to specify the URL right here, employees.json. So we're going to use .then. Right after we fetch, we're going to use then. And this is going to be a function. This is going to contain a response. And remember, you can specify console log the response right here. So we're going to click here on JSON, and you can see we have the response right here. Again, if you open the proto, you can see the methods that you can pass to this response. And you can see that this is employees JSON. So you can see we have a JSON function right here. The previous one, we returned the value as text because this was a text file. But in this case, this is going to be JSON. So we need to add return response.json like this. And then we're going to add then, because we need to give a second then. If you console log, and I'm going to remove this, if you console log the response, you can see that we don't have any values. And you click here on JSON, you can see we have a response. So we need to give a second dot then in this case. Then function, we need to pass some data. It's going to be the return. Now that we have this as a JSON, this is going to be added right here. So we can console log this data and see the response. So click here on JSON, and now you can see we have an array with 3 different objects. If you remember in the example using AJAX, we need to use JSON.parse. In the case of the fetch API, this is going to be right here. This is going to return this as a JSON, and is going to convert the response into JavaScript objects. So right here we have access to this data, and right here is where we are going to print this into the HTML. We're gonna create a variable called HTML. We're gonna use data.forEach because this is an array, so we're gonna add for each. It's going to be a function. This is an array of employees, so we're gonna pass this as employee, and then we're gonna add HTML plus equals so we can concatenate the previous value, and I'm gonna add an li, close the li, $sign, open the curly braces, and we're gonna access this employee. This is going to be the main object, but we need to access this name and the job, so we're gonna dot name, and we're gonna copy this, and this is going to be dot and a job. So finally we need to insert this into the HTML. So right after the for each, right here I'm going to insert into the HTML. So we're gonna use again document, get element by ID, and we're gonna pass the result. It's going to be inner HTML equals to the HTML that we generate from the for each. So save this, click here on JSON, and now you can see we have the different employees, the name and the job. You can add a separator here and click here on JSON, and you can see we have something like this. Click here on load data, and this is going to return the data from this file. So in my opinion, this code from the fetch API is going to look more cleaner than the old AJAX code. So finally, in the next video, we're gonna see how we can consume a REST API using fetch API, and this is going to be the tier button that we have here. So in this video, we're gonna see how we can consume this REST API called pixum.photos/list with fetch API. So in this case, this JSON API button has this button 3 ID. So we're gonna create this event listener. Get element by ID, and again I'm gonna perform all these steps in this example since this is something new. So we're gonna add load rest. This is going to be the name of the function. Prints the response from a REST API. So it's going to be function load rest, and we're gonna fetch this URL. So we're gonna cut this and paste right here. So this is going to be the full response from the server, and we're gonna open the project. Then we're gonna add dot then again, and we're gonna execute a function. This is going to give a response, and again you can console log the response if you want. Click here on JSON API. You can see we have the response, and again in the proto you will see all the different methods that you can pass. In this case we're gonna use JSON. So we need to return this, return response as JSON. Then we're going to add a second then. So this is going to be actual data. So we're gonna console log the data like this, and we're gonna click here on JSON API. So now you can see this is going to return an array with 998 items. So from here we can add, for example, let HTML equals to single quotes. Then we're gonna use data, and this is going to be images, so you can also change this to images. Something like this will work also. And we're gonna add for each function, and we're going to pass an image. So right here you can see that we have, for example, the author, we have the author URL, and we have also the post URL. So we're gonna print some of these into this HTML. We're gonna add HTML, and we're gonna concatenate from the previous value. Then I'm gonna add an li. So li right here. Close the li. And then we're gonna add an anchor, href. And right here inside I'm going to add $sign, open the curly braces, and we're gonna add image. And we're gonna print this author key. So author right here. And then we're gonna add, and actually I think this one should be outside. So right here I'm going to add view image. I'm gonna close the image and I'm gonna add the image author right here. Here on the href I'm going to add this URL, post URL. And also if you want you can add, for example, a target, because this is going to open a new website. So we're gonna add target blank. Right after the for each, we're gonna insert the code, the generated HTML, get element by ID, and we're gonna pass the result. And we're gonna add inner HTML is going to be equals to HTML. Finally, right here we can add the catch in case that we have any error. And console.log the error. In the last example, you can also add this error right here. So let's open this, open the project, and we're gonna close this. You can click here on JSON API, and you can see we have the view image. This is going to be the code that is right here, and also the author. So you can click here, and this is going to open this in a new website. It's going to print something like this, and click here. It's going to print another image. So you can see that this is looking nice, and the code is really clean. And in the next video, we're gonna take again the project that we developed, the name generator, and we're gonna take this from AJAX, and we're gonna convert this into a Fetch API project. Open the previous project that we developed, the name generator. You can see that it has the name AJAX. So we're gonna duplicate this, and I'm gonna rename this to name generator Fetch API. So we're gonna start working with this file. This project. This is going to be really similar in a lot of ways. So we're gonna start working with this. So I'm gonna open this with live server, and this is going to start the server. So we need to open this app.js. You can see this part in the top, the form, these values, these URLs, everything is the same. The only part that is different between an AJAX project and a Fetch API project is going to be the AJAX call. So we're gonna remove all the code from here. So then we're gonna start working with Fetch API. I'm gonna create a comment here. We're gonna call this Fetch API, and we're gonna fetch the URL, because if you remember, we're building this checking the values from the form. So then we're gonna .then, and this is going to contain a response. So we're gonna return this response as JSON. So then we're gonna create a second then. It's going to be function, and this is going to be the names that are generated. So we're gonna console log the names and save this and open the console. We're gonna select, for example, France, male, and 5 names. So we're gonna click here on generate. You can see here we have 5 different names, all from France, and all 4 males. So we're gonna remove this, and we're gonna create the HTML equals to an h2, and we're gonna generate names, and we're gonna close the h2. Then we're gonna continue adding more content into this HTML. We're gonna create an unordered list. We're gonna give the class called list. Here on the bottom, we're gonna add HTML plus equals and close the unordered list. Then these names is going to be an array, so we're gonna add names for each. It's going to be a function. Then we're gonna access each name, and it's going to be HTML equals to template or string literals, and we're gonna add li, close the li, and open the $sign. We need to access this name, so we're gonna use this name and then a dot name like this, and this is going to be good to go. So finally we're gonna insert this, and if you remember, this ID is called result, so we're gonna insert this into the result. So we're going to add document dot, we're gonna add query selector result. Inner HTML is going to be equals to this HTML. Finally, we can catch the error function error, and we can console log the error. So let's save this and let's make a test. We're gonna select United States, we're gonna select mail, and we're gonna generate 5 different names. Click here on generate, and you can see it only print 1 because here I didn't concatenate from the previous line. So again, we're gonna select United States, mail, 5 different names. You can see that this is working. And you can see the code looks more cleaner using Fetch API instead of using AJAX, at least in my opinion. So this is going to be the project for this. In the next video, we're gonna introduce the arrow functions, and then we're gonna continue working with the Fetch API. In this video, we're gonna see the arrow functions. We're gonna open this, and this is a good time to introduce arrow functions because we're gonna continue working with Fetch API, and also we're going to see what is async await. So we're gonna make this to the right, like this, and open the console, like this, and we're gonna open the app.js. We're gonna remove everything from here, and let's see what are arrow functions. We're gonna call this video arrow functions. Maybe it's going to take 2 videos. So we're gonna create a const. Normally we create the variables like this, const learning, or the functions, function, and we add something like console.log, learning modern JS, something like this. Then we console log learning. So save this, and you can see this is going to print learning. It should be using parentheses. So you can see it says learning modern JS. And in this case, you can see it says console log, and we can skip this like this, and it's going to print learning modern JS. So this is the standard way of creating a function. You can see we have function. So you can see we have function and we have the parentheses. Using arrow functions, you can remove this. And you remove function, and then you add something like this, like an arrow right here. And this is going to be the same. So instead of using the word function, you will use this arrow. And then the parentheses is going to be before this arrow. You can see it's printing learning modern JS. In arrow functions, if your code is 1 line long, you can remove the square brackets like this, and you can see we have learning modern JS also. And if you are returning a value, so for example, right here in the learning, you can remove this console log. And like this is going to return the code. You can add console log right here, learning, and save this, and you can see you will have learning modern JS. So in the case that you are returning a value, you can skip the word return, and your function should look like this. If you try to return an object, and we're gonna create the object, let's add something like a message hello. Save this. You can see we have undefined. When you try to return an object, you have to add a parenthesis here, parenthesis, and then the object, and then it's going to be message hello. That's going to be really important. Now let me undo this code a little, like this. So if you try to pass parameters into this function, you are going to be adding this right here. So for example, you can add JavaScript, And then this is going to be the parameter. You can add, for example, tech, and you can remove this. And I'm gonna change this from single quotes to template strings. And $, open the braces, and we're gonna pass the tech. And you can see we have learning modern JavaScript. So this is how you pass parameters into the arrow function. Now, if you only are passing one parameter, you can skip the parentheses. So save this, and now you can see we have the same result. But if you add a second argument, something like learning, let me change the order of this. And right here I'm going to add, if you try to add a comma, message, in tech, and you try to add the curly brace right here, and you add message, then this is going to trigger an error, because when you have more than one parameter, you require the parentheses, tech, like this. And you can see it's working, learning modern JavaScript. But if you are passing only one parameter, you can skip the parentheses, like we did in this example. Let me undo this. And like this, you can see we only have one parameter, and you can skip the parentheses. That's going to be really important. So let me remove this. And we're gonna see arrow functions with a callback. Arrow functions with a callback. Let's say that we have a const called shopping cart. It's going to be equals to album, shirt, and also a guitar. Then we're gonna add a const product quantity. It's going to be equals quantity length. It's going to be, we're gonna add shopping cart, and we can use a map, the map function. Normally we add something like function, and then we add product, and then we return the product that length. So if you console log this, let me close this so you can see better the code. So if you console log this and save, it's going to return the length of these products, the length of the string. You can see here I added function and we added product. You can remove this function and add the arrow right here, and this is going to work. Also remember, if you only have one parameter, you can remove the parentheses, and this will also work. You can see that here we have these curly braces, and this line is only one line long, so we can, for example, remove this, remove the braces like this, and we can also skip the return value. So save this, and you can see we have the same, because we only have one line and we are intended to return that value. So you can see that the arrow functions will save you a lot of code. Finally, let's create a final example using an array with for each and arrow functions. So again, I'm gonna bring back that array because we're gonna use the same example using a shopping cart. So we're gonna call this one arrow function with for each. So we have this shopping cart, and we're gonna create something like shopping cart dot for each. Normally we create something like function, then we pass the product right here and open the braces, and then we console log the product. So we can save this, and you can see we access each value. So again, if you want to take this into arrow functions, you can cut this function and add the arrow right here. This is going to be the same result. Since we only have one parameter, you can remove this, and you can see we have the same result. And also, since this is a one line long, we can also remove this and put everything in one line. So this is going to work also. So in the next video, let's open that fetch API file, the one that was loading a TXT file, a JSON, and something from the REST API. and we're gonna see how we can add arrow functions into that code. Open the previous fetch API and we're gonna duplicate this. I'm gonna call this one fetch API and we're gonna add arrow function. Or we're gonna add something like arrow. Then I'm gonna open this into the Visual Studio Code. Then from here we're gonna open the index.html and we're gonna open this with live server. We're gonna click here on go live. And we're going to take this example using the fetch API and we're gonna remove these functions and we're gonna use arrow functions so you can see the before and after using arrow functions and the advantages that you will find when you are working with arrow functions. So first we're gonna start here in the load.txt file function. You can see we have function right here. We can remove this and add the arrow function. You can see that we are only passing one parameter, so we can skip the parentheses. And also you can see that this function is only one line, so we can make this only one line like this. You can see that we have a return, so we can also remove that part, and it's going to be the code like this, response, and the arrow functions, response, text. So you can see that this looks more cleaner. So we can remove this console log for the second one, and I'm gonna cut this function, and I'm gonna add the arrow function right here. Again, we can skip these parentheses, and again, since this is only one line, we can remove the curly braces like this. And I'm gonna make this a little bigger so we can see better the whole code. I'm gonna remove this. I think I'm gonna remove that sidebar, and this is going to look, you can see how clean this looks compared to the other version. Finally, we have the catch, so we're gonna remove this function, add the arrow function right here, and we're gonna remove the parentheses, remove the braces, so this semicolon, this brace, and add the console into one line. So you can see that we finished this with a 4-line code. So let's see if this is working. We're gonna click here on load data, and you can see we have data from a txt file. And you can see that using fetch API and arrow functions, the code is more simplified. So we're gonna continue with this load JSON. We're gonna remove this function, and we're gonna add the arrow function. We can again remove these parentheses. We're only passing one of these arguments. And again, we can remove the braces, the semicolon, the other brace, and add this everything into one line. We're gonna remove also this return, because this is going to return this code. So add the parentheses here, and you can see we have something like this. Then we have this one. This one doesn't have, well, it's more than one line, so we're gonna only remove this, add the arrow function, and remove the parentheses. So here we have another function, so we're gonna remove that. We're gonna remove the parentheses, and we're gonna use arrow functions. You can see it's looking nicer. Finally, we have the catch, so we're gonna remove this function. We're gonna remove this also, add the arrow function, remove these parentheses, remove this semicolon, remove this arrow, this brace, and put everything in one line like this. So we're gonna test the second button is going to be this JSON. So click here, and you can see we return the data from employees.json. Finally, the last one is going to be this load rest. So again, we can remove this function, add the arrow function, remove these parentheses, remove this brace, remove this return, put everything in one line, remove the semicolon, remove this brace, and it's going to be like this. Again, we have the same problem in the last one. This is more than one line, so we're gonna remove the function, remove the parentheses, and add the arrow function right here, and the same for the for each. Arrow function like this, and then we have the catch. which is going to be remove this. Add the arrow function, we're going to remove also this, semicolon, remove the brace, put everything in one line, and we can save this and click here on load rest. It's going to be JSON API, click, and you can see that this is working. So using the arrow functions, you can see that we remove several lines of code. And in the next video, we're going to continue practicing these arrow functions. We're going to open the name generator with fetch API, and we're going to remove all the functions, and we're going to use arrow functions. So let's continue working in the next video. Open the name generator and the one that says fetch API, and we're going to duplicate this. And we're going to change this name. We're going to add fetch API, and also we're going to use arrow, so we can identify that this is going to be the version and develop using arrow functions. So we're going to open this index.html, and we can start the server, and we can also open the app.js. So open this server. Sometimes it doesn't run at the first time, so we should add this again. I'm gonna make this bigger, and we're gonna open the app.js. So here on the top you can see that we don't have any functions, so we're gonna scroll a little, and you can see here where we have this fetch, we're gonna replace these functions with arrow functions. It's going to be really simple. So we're gonna start here. We're gonna remove this function, and we're gonna add the arrow functions. So from here we can remove the parentheses. It's only one parameter, so we're gonna remove this. We're gonna remove this brace and also this one, semicolon at the end. We're gonna remove this return, and we're going to put everything in one line. You can see how clean this looks. Second one is going to be this one. We're gonna remove again the function, add the array function, the arrow function. We're gonna remove the parentheses, and in this case this one contains more than one line, but you can see here we have the for each, so we can remove this function and add the arrow function right here. Also we can remove the parentheses. We're only passing one argument, and it's going to be like this. Finally we have the catch, so we're gonna remove this and add the arrow function right here. We're gonna remove the braces and put everything in one line. We need to remove also this semicolon, and we can remove these parentheses. So save this, and we're gonna generate some names from Colombia for mail, and we're gonna generate 10 different names. So click here on generate, and you can see that this is working, it's printing the results. Now I have opened the first example that we developed, the one using AJAX, and the second one is using arrow functions and fetch API, and you can see the difference between the code. This one looks more organized and also looks more compact. Of course, this one doesn't have the same amount of comments as this one, but you can see that fetch API code is going to look cleaner. But again, if you're trying to become a JavaScript developer, it's important that you know how to work with AJAX. The new and the old techniques are always important. That's why we added AJAX, and now we're working with fetch. So in the next video, we're going to introduce a new topic. It's going to be called async await. So let's continue working in the next video. So we're going to open again the learning.js file or folder, and we're going to see what is async await. One of the new features in JavaScript is going to be this one. So we're going to run the server. We're going to click here on go live, and we're going to build an example using async await. So we're going to make this smaller and open inspect. We're going to click here on console. Let's open this app.js and remove everything that we have here. At least I'm going to remove it. Again, I recommend that you save all the codes from this course. So we're going to introduce async await. The async function defines an asynchronous function, which returns an asynchronous function object. So normally we create functions like this, function, get clients, and something like this. When you are working with async await, you need to add async before the function. So we're gonna add async right here. With this, we are telling to JavaScript that this function is going to be asynchronous. Then we're gonna create a new promise. We're gonna create a variable const client, and it's going to be equals to a new promise. If you remember, we can pass, normally we pass this as a function and we pass resolve and reject. In this case, we're gonna remove this because we're gonna use arrow functions. So arrow functions like this, and open the curly braces. So we're gonna create, we're gonna add set timeout right here, set timeout. And inside the body, we're going to add parentheses. Again, we're gonna use an arrow function. So the code is going to look like this. Then we're gonna delay this 1 second. So let's say that we want to download a list of clients. So right here, we're gonna add resolve is going to be equals to client list downloaded. And we're gonna simulate that this is taking 1 second because it's downloading the list of clients from the server. So this is going to take 1 second to perform. Then we're gonna create an error. Const error, in this case, is going to be equals to true. And we're gonna see this in action in just a little. We're gonna check if error. If there is any error, we're gonna reject this, but in this case, I'm gonna deny this. So this is going to be when there is no error. So we're gonna const the response, and you can see we added async, and this is called async await. Right here you need to add await, and this is awaiting until this function is executed. So it's going to await for clients. So basically we're telling here, wait this response until this client's function or promise is executed. So this is going to hold until clients is executed. That's one of the benefits of using async await. Then we're gonna return the response. So in the else statement, we're gonna use await. Again, we're gonna await for the error or for the success in case this is going to be an error. Here we're gonna use promise that reject, and we're going to add there was an error. So this is going to be the code that is going to be executed if there is an error. And you can see we have await right here and await right here. So both of these are going to be holding until this function finish executing. That is going to take 1 second. And normally when you are downloading a list of clients, well, it will depend on how many clients you are downloading. But basically this function is going to hold until this function is executed. So we're gonna call this get clients. So we're gonna get clients here. If you console log, get clients like this, you can see you have a promise and it says pending. So always when you see this message, you have to add .then at least, and then we're gonna get a response, arrow function, and we're gonna console log this response. Then in order to get the error, we're gonna use catch. So the error and console log the error. So now we can get rid of this promise using this .then and this .catch. Remove this semicolon at the end, save this, and now you can see we have there was an error because we have error equals true. So basically the await promise reject was executed and we are printing the error using the catch. That's why we have there was an error. If we make a change here from error to false, then it's going to execute this function. It's going to wait 1 second and then it's going to resolve with this. This await is going to hold until this function is executed, and then it's going to print the response, which is going to be this result. So save this, 1 second, and you can see we have client list downloaded because this code was holding until this code was executed, and then print the resolve. Resolve is when the code is successful, reject is when something failed. So one of the advantages of using this is that maybe this takes 1 second or maybe it takes 5 seconds. This code is going to hold until this function finish getting the client list, and then you can see it prints the code. So this is going to be really nice because you don't know how much time is going to take to download the list of clients. Maybe the company only has 10 clients, so it's going to be really fast. But maybe you are downloading 1 million of clients, so that's going to take longer. So these are basically the basics of async await. You add async before the function, and you use await, and this is going to stop this code from executing until this function, this promise, finish executing. So in the next video, we're gonna see how we can use the same code, asynchronous function and await, with a REST API. So let's create an example using async await with a REST API. We're gonna use async await with a REST API. So we're gonna create an asynchronous function. It's going to be async, then you give the name of the function, and then it's going to be called get post, like this. So we're gonna use again JSON placeholder. We're gonna make this a little bigger. You can see that we have here post, so this will download 100 posts. So this is going to be a nice example that we can use async await. So we're gonna add a comment, wait until the posts are downloaded. So we're gonna add const response equals to await, and we're gonna use fetch, and we're gonna pass this URL. Then we're gonna execute then. So we're gonna add const data is going to be equals to await response .json. So basically here we are using await until this finish downloading all this list, and then once it finishes downloading, we're gonna stop this code from running until this previous line finish executing, and we're gonna convert this into JSON. Finally, we're gonna console log until the second await finish executing. So we're gonna return the data like this. So we're gonna call this get post. So if you try to add get post like this and it's going to cause you an error, I'm gonna console log this, console log. So save this and open the project. You can see we have a promise pending. So we need to always use .then. So we're gonna use .then, and we're gonna call this post. So we can console log the post. It's going to be in plural right here. So save this, and you can see that it downloaded 100 posts. So basically here we are telling to fetch this post, and this code is going to be blocked until this finish downloaded. Then once we have the response, this code is going to stop, or it's going to be blocked from running until this previous line finish downloading all these posts. Then we're gonna return this. So basically this line is going to wait until this and these lines finish executing, and then we're gonna return the data. So you can reload this, and you can see it takes a while, and then it returns the response. But only 100 records. You can see here on photos we have this one that contains 5,000 photos. So we're gonna copy this and paste and open the console. So you can see this is going to download 5,000 items, and this one takes longer. So the most important part here is that you need to add async before the function, and then the code that you want to block is going to use await. And this is going to be asynchronous code in JavaScript. Finally, well, of course, the most important is going to be .then. But remember, when you see in the console promise, that means that you need to add a .then. So in the next video, we're going to open again the name generator, and we're going to create an asynchronous function. One last thing, normally you will add only asynchronous when you have things like this, when you are querying a REST API or something like that, is where you are going to add asynchronous. So let's continue working. In the next video, we're gonna see a more detailed example with the name generator project. We're going to open this name generator, the one that says fetch API and arrow. We're gonna duplicate this, and I'm gonna rename this to name generator fetch API arrow and async. So this is going to be a really complete example of modern JavaScript. In my opinion, this is going to be one of the most complex examples in this course. But of course, there are more projects in this course. So we're going to open this index.html. We're going to run the server, open with live server, and close this. We're going to open the JS, and we're going to open the app.js. The idea here, and I'm going to make this a little bigger, is that this code from the fetch API, we make this asynchronous. So we're going to create a new function. We're going to create a function. We're going to add async. So this is going to be a synchronous function. And we're going to create the function, and it's going to be called get names, like this. So we're going to pass, for example, or we're going to execute these get names inside the fetch, and it's going to be asynchronous. So basically, we're going to take these two lines, and these are going to be part of the get names. So we're going to pass the fetch and the URL. So I'm going to make some changes here. First, the get names is going to take the URL. So we're going to add URL in order to pass this into the fetch. Right here on the fetch, I'm going to add a new variable. I'm going to call this one response. And it's going to be equals to fetch and URL. We want to block this code from running, and we're going to add a wait right here. So this is going to be blocked until the URL returns the complete response. So then we're going to remove this, and then I'm going to add const names is going to be equals to response.json. But here I'm going to block this again. So you can see we have this await. So this is going to query the REST API. Is going to block this code from running until the URL returns the response complete. And then we have this response.json. This is going to be blocked again from running using await. So finally, we're going to return, and we're going to return the names like this. So this is going to be an object. We're going to return an object. So basically, this syntax is to return an object called names. So then we can scroll to the top, and here we're going to execute this function. We're going to call this one get names, and we're going to open the parentheses. Here you can see we use the URL builder. So we're going to pass this right here. So now this is going to be available in the get names, and it's going to use fetch and response as JSON. So right here you can see we have get names and we have URL, and then we have the result, which is going to be these names. Then we make the for each, and everything is working. So we're gonna save this, and let's open the console. Open the console. You can see that there are no errors. So we're gonna select, for example, from Italy, we're gonna select female, and we're gonna generate 10 different names. So click here on generate. And you can see we have names for each. It's not a function. So let me console log this name, and we can see what is happening here. Console log names, and again we're gonna select Italy, female, and we're gonna generate 5. Generate, and now you can see we have names, and it's an array. So if you open this, you can see we have names, and then we have names. And this is happening because here we're returning names. Right here we are returning an object, and here we are trying to loop to an object, but we need to loop to an object and then access the array. So it's going to be something like this. I'm gonna add a new variable called names response. It's going to be equals to names that names, like this. So it's going to be an object. This is returning an object. So we need to access names. You can see we have names, and then we have names. So if you console log this, console log names response, and save this, we're gonna generate again Italy and generate, and now you can see we have 5 different items. So now we have, I'm gonna remove this. The only thing that we need to make is to copy this and paste this right here. So now we save this again, and we're gonna add, for example, Mexico, female, and we're gonna generate 5 different names, and you can see that this is working. So you can see that in this code, we created this function using async, and then we blocked this function using await. Here on the top we have another function, but this one doesn't require to be async, because you can see the type of task that this is doing doesn't require to query a REST API. At the bottom we have this one, and this one is querying the REST API. So in some functions like this one is where I recommend to use async. So in the next video we're gonna develop, in the next chapter we're gonna develop a really complete project. We're gonna use classes and methods, constructors, we're gonna use arrow functions, we're gonna use fetch API, we're gonna use promises, we're gonna use everything that we have learned so far in this course.